everyone for joining us and sticking around. I can promise you this conversation, as I was just telling Hala, was going to be a very laid-back, very honest, and very open conversation that we are going to be having. And the title of our panel now, as our MC has just said, is Trailblazing Careers in Hospitality, the people behind the industry. And I think we can all agree that this industry is pretty volatile. You have a lot of waves of change that are happening globally, and the tourism and hospitality industry are one of those industries that really get affected by some of these changes that we're seeing. This includes pandemics, recessions, wars, very bad economic situations, and much, much more. But I think we can all agree as well that hospitality workers and people who work in the tourism industry in general are a main driver of this sector in pushing it forward through all of these adversities. And speaking of trailblazing careers, I'd like to introduce a little bit more about Hala. Hala has advised on more than 5,000 hospitality and mixed-use projects in the last 20 years across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. And since we're talking about careers in hospitality, we essentially want to know the people behind the titles. And Hala, in the spirit of this introduction, I wanted to let you inform the audience and let us all know who is the face behind this 20-year career of yours.
Thank you, Lenah. And I must say, this is a very different kind of conversation that I'm having today, because I can't hear myself talking anymore about valuations and operator negotiations. So it's really nice to look at how this has all come through. So very few would know I've landed in the hospitality industry. I've always wanted to become a lawyer. And
wow.
yes, so this is what I was planning. That's what I was aspiring for. And then one day I realized that, you know what, I want to eventually be able to travel internationally and to do work internationally. And perhaps I should switch gears. But then again, putting things in context, I think 30 years ago when I graduated, the hospitality industry or our understanding of hospitality was very different. So it was predominantly either hotels, in the traditional way, or F&B.
Yeah.
So I did a couple of years working in operations, definitely. I then moved on to do my MBA in strategy and finance, and I worked for PwC, just getting a bit of a sense of what ultimately I would enjoy best in the industry. And then moved on to work for Al-Kharafi, which is a Kuwaiti group that had a number of hotels in the Middle East. And meanwhile, I taught on the subject of travel and tourism. And interestingly, that was 2001. And I've asked all the students to get into groups, and I've assigned them countries in the Middle East at a time when there was no tourism in the Middle East. There was hardly any vision. And I remember very well we've earmarked Qatar as being a destination, with the strength in production of gas and oil, and other cities. And just fast forward 25 years later, it's just amazing to see how much of transformation has happened. So post PwC, it did seem to me this is an industry that is so dynamic, and as you rightly said, volatile. But I like to look at it from the point of view, volatility, not in the negative sense, although oftentimes there are many negative situations that impact us, but it's dynamic in the sense that it has grown substantially. What's happening in this part of the world is a real transformation in terms of the hospitality offering, but also what's happened internationally and globally, and how we define hospitality now is very different. And therefore, the conversation around people in this industry today is not anymore around being a GM in a hotel or operating an F&B. It's much more beyond that, and we'll get into this. But yeah, lawyer ended up where I am after 25 years. I'm not complaining, though. What I perhaps enjoy most about the 21 years with HUS is that instead of working for a general consulting, where that's perfectly fine as well, just being focused onto the hospitality sector gives you much more exposure and much more knowledge, and being able to see it all from planning all the way to actually asset managing it and then disposing it. So
yeah, I think you've touched on a lot of things. And my next question, which is, in your 20-year career span, which is what you've been speaking about, the main changes that you've seen when it comes to people in hospitality. I know you spoke about moving away from traditional kind of roles and even jobs and functions. But what are the main changes that you've seen when it comes to people in the industry over the past 20 years?
So there's a couple of things. Some are rather regional, having worked also in Europe and Asia and then the Middle East. There are some cultural differences, but perhaps the similarity is that also we're seeing an increase in the attractiveness of this industry. So yes, while we did have a couple of mature markets, whether it's the US or Europe and Asia, in the Middle East, most of these markets are emerging, with a few exceptions that are mature. And with that maturity, or with emerging markets, you see great opportunities, which along the great opportunities that this industry now offers is the real challenge of how are we going to staff it. And it's not, as I said, it's not anymore strictly around a number of new hotels. I mean, if we look at the data, and over the last 2 days, we've been talking about the pipeline of either existing or future hotel, where are we going to find people? And more importantly, when we actually are able to employ and train, how are we going to retain them? And whether this industry, despite how much transformation has happened on the back of whether it is the technology, whether it is design, whether it is operating model development, whether we have actually, as an industry, been able to transform in the way we appeal to make this industry even more attractive and to attract more talent. But one definite thing, what I've seen over the last 20 years and across not just the Middle East but elsewhere, is that there is much more knowledge of what this industry is. It seems to be a good option where there is career progression, because oftentimes this new generation is also much more focused on the career progression.
And for men and women.
For men and women, definitely. Yeah. We are also finding that, you know, in the old days, perhaps it was perceived as long hours, difficult hours, limiting women applying and potentially thinking of growing through the ranks. I think with all that has happened over the last couple of years, it's become much more encouraging. There's just so much more we still need to do, but we have come a long way. And I think we have come a long way on many fronts. On the people front, yeah, definitely in their trust, and also able to relate to the big operators and the big firms that are really looking now to retain and develop that talent. Alongside that, I think where we need to see much more support is probably on the academic front. But even that, when I look at the previous programs in the way they, you know, the courses you would take, they've come a long way. I mean, I was actually looking the other day at the Lyon program, and now you can do entrepreneurship, you can do luxury, you can do F&B. There's just so many sub-specializations of our industry that, yes, if it's not made for everyone to be a GM or an F&B manager, there's just so much more that you can do to support this industry.
Yeah, and I'm happy you brought this up, the academics of it, because I was going to ask you, are you seeing a growing interest from younger generations to get into this sector? Because you mentioned that there are challenges and there are long hours. Maybe, if I can say, it's not a job for everyone, but now there's a variety of roles and functions. Are you seeing an increasing interest, or is the sector not attractive enough for younger generations in this day and age?
Well, definitely there is a growing interest. The real challenge lies in the fact that globally this industry is growing, and we're somehow fighting for the same pool of talent, right? In this part of the world, the shortage is massive. And that's why my understanding, at least, is that there are a number of universities that are looking now to set up campuses, both from an executive standpoint, but also vocational, in order to be able to train and upskill. In our part of the world, I definitely think there is a real opportunity and a real interest as well, because it's a sector that is poised for growth. Right? I mean, there is still a good 10, 15, 20-year run. It took 20 years Dubai to develop this infrastructure, and it still grows by the day. And there's so many other markets, be it Saudi, be it Morocco, be it Egypt. There are just so many markets. Some markets perhaps are blessed with the fact that they do have a large population that could support that. The question is, how quick can we upskill people? But it's no secret. I mean, hoteliers in this room would tell you it's a nightmare when a new hotel opens because they lose their people, right? So everyone's shopping around for the same kind of pool of talents, but it is becoming more attractive.
Yeah, you touched on a very one of the challenges that the sector faces, but I wanted to ask you of your opinion of other challenges that are facing the tourism and hospitality industry, and this can include labor shortages, as you said, funding. What do you think are some of these challenges, effects on hospitality careers and the view of the hospitality industry? And as a consultant, what are some of the solutions that you see can be implemented to face some of these challenges?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if these challenges that we typically attribute, and we're here speaking in the context of hospitality, I think these are challenges that pretty much apply to all industries. It's actually the ability to adapt to an ever-changing, dynamic pace, right? I think the one other is actually your type of recruits. What are they looking for? They're quite demanding. I mean, the future workforce is very different to what we have traditionally. The flexibility, it's an industry that perhaps doesn't necessarily allow for the same flexibility, although we hear a lot of talks around how we're bringing efficiencies and eliminating to a large extent some roles. The truth is you still need, to create a memorable experience, it requires two people coming together, right? So there's no way you're going to be able to eliminate that kind of touch point.
So you think that AI is not going to be a negative effect on the industry?
We should use it, and I think we are, and many operators and also investors are using it in many ways to actually create more efficiencies and streamline operations. But the truth is this traveler of the future is becoming even more sophisticated and demanding, that while they appreciate all the technologies that, is the back of house, they are also looking for those sort of experiences, memorable experiences. So it's going to be a balance. No, I'm not of the view that because of all this technology, we're going to need less. I wish that was the solution. If anything, with all the pipeline, we're going to need more people. But I guess what my piece of advice would be is that, we use our skills in a transferable way, and we look at ways to really expand within the hospitality industry, because I really think there is just so many direct and indirect industries that support the hospitality industry. So there is something for everyone, right? Yeah. So we need to perhaps educate more the future generation that, working for the industry is not just around working in a hotel and long hours. It's not around just being in an F&B outlet. It's far beyond that. And perhaps it's also time for our industry to actually see whether we could potentially reassess how long people work. Yeah. Right? I mean, we need to catch up with other industries.
Yeah. Lastly, I know we ran out of time, but this is a very important question. And I think we touched upon the amount of people working and some of the challenges. But I think something we should touch on lastly is the core values and characteristics that someone or is needed in your view that an individual should have in order to be a trailblazer in the industry.
So I'm going to respond to that as a consultant and advisor that have been here for 20 years, but I think my response really applies. In my experience, you really need to build credibility. You need to be agile, open-minded, flexible, and true. I mean, there are many other characteristics, but at least in the consulting world, what I find extremely important, because there is a big responsibility, right? I mean, we're behind advising on projects, we're behind major investments, we're behind, and we're there for the longer period of time, from feasibility study to actually asset managing the property and potentially the exit of the hotel. I think credibility is an extremely important one, being true and genuine.
On that note, I think that's a perfect ending for our panel. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a round of applause for Hala and Matar.
Thank you.